more than doubled sales calls that were booked on the calendar once we had the setting team in place.
I'd say the biggest eye-opener was about a month or so after we had brought those setters on, was when they just hacked my calendar of sales calls. And I think I took like 72 showed sales calls that I took that month. And that was the first month we broke 100,000 in booked revenue, which was exciting. I was also dead.
A lot of people are talking about setters, and a lot of people want to get setters up and running, but they maybe haven't done it themselves. They don't know how to do it. There's a lot of questions, a lot of misunderstandings and myths about setters, crazy expectations sometimes people have. And what we wanted to do was to really have a raw, real conversation about the triumphs and the tribulations of getting your setters in place. So I guess just to give everybody who's watching this a little bit of a backstory so they know a little bit about you guys, I'm going to kind of tell them about initially what David and Elle had done was they were doing a lot of affiliate type of marketing. They were selling products for insurance agents. They originally had a web development agency before that. And they were kind of in this lifestyle entrepreneur business mode. And then eventually they started to transition into more of a high ticket coaching and community-based model where they have a mastermind and they're able to help people hand in hand. And they started to transition from lifestyle entrepreneur into being more of a leader, wanting to build a business, wanting to build a community. Leading up to that, I know a little bit of backstory. When you guys made the transition into more of a coaching model, you had reached out to clients and community, right? And if you guys want to catch that, we've done an interview before, and you can check out that interview as well. We'll put the notes here and as well link in the description. So you guys reached out to them, you got your high ticket offer up and running. And for those of you guys who don't know, Clients and Community specializes in Facebook groups, especially for client acquisition. And so when you guys first started, how long were you setting?
It was at least 6 months or so that we were kind of managing that ourselves. We had a team member that wasn't originally brought in for setting, that we kind of pushed into the role, for better or for worse. I don't think it was necessarily the greatest fit for him, but yeah, we were doing it.
And I was setting, and David was taking the strategy sessions, doing the sales calls. So we had one team member along with myself that were setting. So, and we didn't even really call it that. This has been like a very organic process for us because we didn't even know that's exactly what we were doing at the time. We were just trying to get the sales calls on the calendar.
And so prior to that, had you guys, what was your experience with setting or having those types of conversations to push the sales calls?
That was the first time that we've ever done anything like that before.
Okay.
We didn't have any experience with setters, and we didn't even know that was really even a sales position really until we started working with coaching sales.
How long did it take you guys to kind of get the hang of it when you first started?
I was gonna say we didn't really, we didn't know what we were doing. So and we didn't really have anybody else in the market, I guess, to really compare ourselves to know, or to have anything else to look to really as an example. So we really just didn't know what we were doing. And I don't think we really realized how broken that process was until we started really focusing on it. And we did our first round of recruitment of setters and brought them in. And that was when our eyes really opened up to the possibilities and also how valuable having a great setting team is.
What happened during the process of bringing that first round of setters in gave you guys the insight that, hey, this processes are broken or the process is non-existent?
We didn't even have a process for that, or no, we leaned on coaching sales very heavily to guide us and educate us on even going through hiring and bringing those people on and initial training. We didn't have sales training or setting training for our company or any of that type of stuff. So I think that really opened our eyes to all of that as well.
And I think it was also just starting to see real volume starting to like be booked onto the sales calendar. That was the real eye-opening thing for me of like, whoa, this is sort of because we had our lead flow down, or we thought. Sometimes you just don't even really know, like, do you have enough leads coming in, or is it, the lead nurture process? Like, what's really the thing that's going to be the thing that ends up on, having those calls that are booked on the calendar. I think we thought we had a process, but once we started installing that setting team and then seeing, we more than doubled sales calls that were booked on the calendar once we had the setting team in place. It was really eye-opening to see that we had everything that we needed to book out the calendar. We just, other than the people and the processes, which was something that we didn't know.
I would say the biggest eye opener was about a month or so after we had brought those setters on, was when they just hacked my calendar of sales calls. And I think I took like 72 showed sales calls that I took that month. And that was the first month we broke 100,000 in booked revenue, which was exciting. I was also dead.
Yeah, it's one of those things like, yes, now I need a nap for a week.
Now I need a closer.
Yeah. So what, with the moment, like when they doubled the call volume, what do you feel like prior to that was the thing that was bottlenecking you from hitting that same volume on the lead flow?
I think one of the things was us. I mean, that's not necessarily our specialty, our role. We didn't have a process for it. And, we also had to run the rest of the company and fulfillment too. So I think it was definitely us as a huge bottleneck that we needed to get ourselves out of that role. And then having a set process that just allowed us to keep up with all the lead opportunity and flow that we had in order to have those triages to sets. Oh.
Yeah, I don't think we really started the process to solve necessarily even like a bottleneck so much, other than to move David off of the phones. And so he was getting really burnt out on taking sales calls. And so that was sort of the process to get a closer on the phones to replace him, was to backfill our setting team or to backfill for that role. And we were a little bit resistant to it because we had somebody that we thought on our team that was doing fine in that position, but it was really by trusting the advice of coaching sales and trusting that process of going ahead, hiring. We did the recruitment of 4 setters all at one time, which was one of the scariest points ever for me, because we had never brought that many people into our team all at once. But it really showed me that yes, we had an issue with our setting team, even though the goal really was to get David off of the phones, which he did get off of the phones because we found an awesome closer through that process of bringing on those setters.
What did you find like the most difficult part about managing setters, leading setters, and getting them to where they needed to be?
I mean, I think without having the coaching sales guidance and training and stuff, it would have been every single aspect of that. I mean, the tracking, that was something that, we were doing ourselves. So we didn't really have that detailed of tracking and in-depth metrics and the numbers to really evaluate and look at. So that was really huge. Continued training for them as well on how to develop that position. And like I said, that's a position we just kind of started organically kind of doing, but we didn't know what made someone really good at that and how you develop them into that.
So how did you overcome that sort of reluctance or that concern that you had there?
Well, trusting the process, definitely having the guidance from coaching sales was super helpful. But just trusting that we were setting up the standards and I was approaching everything as a test. So everything was kind of like a 2-week test. We'll set it up and then let it run. And I really committed myself to not making any major changes for at least 2 weeks. Like I want 2 weeks of data before I'm going to make any major changes.
Makes sense. And then so at the end of the 2 weeks, what did the data tell you?
That most of my concerns were unfounded, and that I really didn't need to be that concerned about it. Like there's always optimization and there's always tweaks to be made. And it's also just kind of coming to terms with that this is a numbers game. And so it's going to be okay if you have people reach out and, who is this person? Or, I had this like weird conversation with somebody, and especially as you're onboarding and bringing on new people, and just kind of getting comfortable with that. And so I think it was just it was a lesson for me in growth. And of course, like listening to calls, providing feedback where it was necessary, but really realizing that I was worried a lot more about things that didn't actually happen.
That makes sense. And it's interesting too that like part of it is I love the experimentation mindset because that's huge. Now, what were the optimizations that you made over the initial kind of period of time? Like what were some of the little things that you saw, okay, hey, this could be done better, let's make the shift, and you started to see some pretty cool results, as well as you saw, hey, let's try this, and then it's like, crap, that didn't work, let's go back to what we were doing before?
I know a few of the optimizations are like continuing to work on the scripting, the messaging of when they reach out, when they connect, and also working on some of the follow-up prior to set for the show rate increasing, and then also with it being Facebook and the reach outs, if something was being sent in Messenger but they hadn't accepted a friend request yet, then goes the message request box, which most people don't know how to find, and so how to increase either the acceptances or make it easier for them to spot in their messenger request box where that was. So little tips and tricks and things that we've done there to improve that process. But I would say some of the biggest processes were on the actual triage calls that the setters did, on qualifying the prospects and how they handled that, how they framed it, how they went through that call. And we found a lot of success, but continued areas to optimize by changing and experimenting there as well.
And what was an example of maybe one or two shifts that you made in the triage call script? Like what was, do you guys remember what was one of those things that you did that helped you create a much better experience for the prospects and help you guys see some lift?
I think one of the first ones in the very beginning of the calls was the framing of the call, and letting the prospect know what to expect for the call, how long the call was going to be, what the potential end of the call was going to be.
One of the other things too that I think helped, which was a change that we made as we started reviewing the calls, was really helping our setters not view themselves as appointment setters, and that they really are community advisors, because we do so much out of our Facebook group, and empowering them to advise on the call, and almost kind of running it as like a little mini strategy session in a way to determine if that person should move on to the next step of having the sales call, or should they be redirected to resources.
What about because you guys transitioned your setter into a closer, or at least one of them had successfully transitioned into a closer. How did that come about? Like what was your process there? What were some of the challenges in that transition as well?
That was actually probably one of the biggest successes, I think, for sure, was having person start out in setting role, because that's what we needed, and to get rolling with that, and did very, very well, was producing the best numbers and the best qualified sets from that. And then to the point where I got maxed out on the sales calls and was ready to move out of that role too, and then started transitioning them into that role. Ended up being a perfect fit. They take all our sales calls now, which I'm very thankful for, and do very, very well. But that actually was a pretty smooth process. I mean, there was a bit of training around that, but thankfully he's incredibly quick learner, and of our offer, understood our audience, and hopped right into that. And I would say it felt like a pretty smooth transition. And I think within even just a couple months of him in that role, is he did over 100,000 booked revenue by himself. So yeah, I was very, very happy with that transition. And I think it made a lot of sense coming from the setting side into the closing role, even if maybe was already a fit for the closing role at the beginning, because that allowed him to really get to know our audience, our community, how to interact with them, what leads to a very good set to then close, and all of that. So yeah.
And it was gradual as far as like I forget exactly what we set it as, but he could only set so many calls to himself on his own calendar. So he did kind of phase into it, but 100% I agree with David, and that because he did set first, I absolutely helped him fast track into that closing position. And I think has made him a better closer, and he still sets for himself. And there's something to be said about somebody that is always willing to go, and when volume is low, go out there and prospect, find their own leads and put them up on the calendar for himself. Like, to me, that just says a lot about the person, their work ethic, and what they're willing to do and their commitment to the organization.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think also it helps them a lot anyway, because then they can start to communicate when you do have other setters, they're better at communicating their needs, or they're better at understanding and empathizing with what the setters themselves are going through. So it doesn't turn into finger pointing, because sometimes there is tension between the setters and the closers, and then the closers are blaming the setters for putting crap on the calendar, and the setters are blaming the closers for not closing the deals. And when someone's willing to go to that side and start to do that, it makes it a lot easier for them to have a conversation where they're on the same page and they're aware of what's going on. And so what made you guys want to try the done for you route?
So our setting team was working Facebook group really, really well, but we had a lot of potential in our SMS and email list, which we really didn't have the capacity to build out systems to support our setting team into onboarding, into having conversations inside email and inside SMS. So it was really those specific channels that we started working with Done For You to help us work, because they were not getting worked at all.
And so that was really part of the decision, as well as, especially with those other channels, that they had such defined processes and vast amount of experience and testing for those, versus us trying to build that out from the ground up ourselves and figure all that out ourselves. Also, capacity wise, we only have so much time in managing and training resources versus having ones that are already managed and trained and overseen. That was a big part too.
Makes sense. And for a little bit, you guys ran both Done For You and in-house setters, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys structure that?
For initially, Done For You setters was managing the email, the texting, the Facebook Messenger, and most of the areas besides the Facebook group, where the in-house setters had only really been trained and focusing on the Facebook group. So they continued to set from the opportunities from there. But that's kind of how it initially started off.
So Done For You wasn't working the Facebook group. They were just working anything that came through. And outbound dials. That's also, I can't believe I forgot that. Yeah. That was also a huge thing, because our setting team was not doing that. So they were working, just like all of the assets that we already had in different ways than our setting team currently was. So we kept our in-house setters just in their same processes, and then worked with Done For You and getting them access to our email, SMS, all of the phone numbers that we had that had never been called, and so we worked with them on getting all of those processes set up, and they worked everything that was old essentially in the pipeline.
Now, had you tried to get your in-house setters to do that, and then it was just a frustration that it wasn't happening, or no, you just wanted them to focus primarily on the group?
It was more a systems thing in that I just really didn't have the time to build the systems for getting our setters set up to do all of that. So it was very appealing to me to have a done for you option for the processes and the systems, and for people that, as David mentioned, like the setting team is already used to doing outbound dials, working in SMS and email conversations. So we just really didn't have the infrastructure for our setting team to do that.
And we would have needed to hire more in-house setters if we were to do that, because there's enough opportunity and leads that needed to be reached that even not all of them were being reached within the group. And so didn't want to necessarily take their focus off of that. And so we would have needed to add even additional setters anyways.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I obviously you guys know this, but for anyone watching this, one of the things that we talk a lot about in Successful CEOs is that when you think about building a system, it's not just building a system. And I think that a lot of people, when they do think about building a system, they think, oh, I got to build a system, but you have to also monitor and then govern the system. So it's a lot more intensive than sometimes people might think. And yeah, you have probably built the system to do some of that stuff, yes, but then the monitoring and the governing of all those channels at the same time starts to quickly accelerate like the overall headache on it of like, how do I track these? What are my KPIs? What do I do when they're out of KPI? What do we do when, things are at a certain threshold? And trying to figure out all of those starts to become a pretty serious puzzle to wrap your head around. So it makes sense.
One of the other things with done for you setters that was super attractive to us is that they work so many different accounts that they have access to all of this data to know what's working in the industry. So like I've been running Facebook ads for a while now for a certain type of ad that we really haven't converted off of. And I told Louis Ray from Done For You, I was just like, I want you guys in working these specific leads and telling me like, do I just need to turn these ads off, or are we not working them properly? And so that was something too, of just getting more data, context, and understanding of what's actually working in the industry, because they're seeing that across the board for so many different accounts than just ours.
Yeah, it's so big. And I think it's sometimes hard for people to understand like the compound effect of that amount of data and that amount of insight, where you're seeing the test and it's not like, is it just this account that's going off track, or is it across all accounts? And then you start to be able to really verify what's working and what's not way quicker.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to bring up too was, it was interesting in the conversation with Chris, is he said outbound dials, he thought outbound dials were going to be the end all be all for him, and it wasn't. And then for you guys, it is a huge heavy lifter. And this is one of the things that we talked about over there. And I just wanted to reiterate it here is like the channels that work vary based on the audience you're serving and the systems you're running. And so you guys serve insurance agents, and insurance agents just expect random calls and they answer random calls. Whereas, sometimes where Chris is in more of a corporate type of audience, they don't answer a random call. And so it's a completely different audience. And so what you're seeing is going to really be a big heavy lifter for you guys, might not be what is a big heavy lifter for someone else, and vice versa, which I also think is super interesting. And then, so in terms of the process for like the done for you side, what were potentially some of the initial concerns when you guys were when you're bringing this team on board? What were some of those concerns when you're looking at like, hey, they're not necessarily in my team, they're not necessarily completely managed by us?
Yeah, I think one of the concerns was the same as if we had brought it in-house, of knowing the industry, the offer, what we have, all that kind of stuff, which is all just onboarding type stuff and training anyways there. So just communicating that. And then what would the feedback communication be like as we started working with them, since it wasn't people that we'd be having daily huddles with and diving into. And I will say we were very pleasantly surprised or very, very happy with, the account manager side and the communication there and how in depth that was with the process. And so it was nice to be able to have one person relaying, contacting with, overseeing everything that we could communicate with on a daily basis. That was ensuring the rest of that team was performing and got our feedback and was implementing it. So yeah, that was really great. And I think that alleviated a lot of our concerns.
I mean, there's always just that, like, is this going to work? But at the same time, it kind of just approaching it as a test. And like David said, just as we would approach it with a new setter coming onto our team or a new round of setters, we've just approached it very much the same way. Like, we're just going to set it up, follow the process, and look at the numbers and look at the data. And that's worked well for us. And so that's what we do. We try not to like jump to conclusions or jump to making decisions too soon. And then a little bit of a concern for me of just kind of like the dynamic with our in-house setting team, but with our in-house setting, we're kind of at that point where we would probably be needing to do another round of recruitment for setters. So it kind of just, the timing seemed like it aligned. And so we're like, okay, well, we'll try it and we'll do a test. We'll see how it works. And if it works, then this is great. But if not, then we have other resources too that we can go back to doing the recruitment for in-house as well.
Makes perfect sense. And then how have been the results when you compare in-house versus done for you, and like when you're comparing the experiences as well, like what's that look like for you guys?
I would say that overall, I think we're getting more sets and more consistency with done for you. I mean, just like with in-house, it's like cool a little bit, just like with in-house, there's a little bit of a ramp up period as everything gets put in place and used to the processes and getting tech integrated and everything. I will say that that with all the channels that they were getting set up with for us and running, that actually happened a lot faster than I was expecting with all of that. But it's nice because of them working multiple channels is that we have consistency, because one day we may get a bunch from one channel and the other day we may get some from one and some from the other. And so that's been really helpful overall, just having a little bit more consistency with the number of sets.
Yeah, I feel like it's still one of those things where it's kind of, we're still looking at the data. To me, it feels like having done for you setters, like, and as David said, it's like some weeks are really good, some weeks are less, and it is that way, and that's just how it is. And so kind of, this might be a little bit premature to say, but having done for you setters feels like having a fully functioning in-house setting team, but without all of the management of having to manage the team. So, I mean, I think that's huge for us as far as all of the systems, processes, and management that they take over, but still having the volume and quality of those calls booked to the calendar.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate how management intensive a setter team really is. You know, it's and I find that the setters require even more management than a closer does, right? Because they're just a more entry level role, they're a higher activity role. So there's more moving parts for what they're doing, and they're not nearly as autonomous sometimes as once you get a closer ramped, like they're pretty self-sustaining after they're ramped, and they might have their little, point where they hit a slump, and mentally you got to come in and snap them out of it. And then once they're out of it, they're back running for a few good months, and it's just, they need that kind of like jump start every now and then. But for the set team, it's like a constant management, and it's really intense. I think a lot of people underestimate that.
It is. It's in that level, keeping that level of accountability to them, because it's so much activity that they have to do on a daily basis. So to not have that, need to like, okay, your numbers entered, like, let's look at these numbers, like what happened, like all of these questions. So it's really nice that Done For You has all of that all ready to go. We get a nice report at the end of the day. And of course, see the calls booked throughout the day. And working with the team is really great because we can, go if volume is low, we can still work together with them of like, can we do an email blast? Can we do an SMS blast? Like, what can we do to get more conversations going so that we're, putting more sets up on the calendar?
Cool. And for anyone that's looking to build their first setter team or just put setters in like on their first setter install, whether they go in-house, whether they go Done For You setters, doesn't matter, but what would be your kind of main recommendation or word of advice to someone who wants to bring setters on and maybe they've tried it and it didn't work, or this is their first time really trying it?
I would say set up your processes and let them run, and not to jump to conclusions or to make decisions based off of like how you feel like something's going in a day or even in a week. I think for us, it really took about 6 weeks of really like intensive ramp up to really start seeing the results that we wanted to see from our setting team. And even beyond that, like it's a constant, we're optimizing, we're discussing, we're in listening to calls and reviewing conversations with them.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. I know this is going to be super helpful for everyone out there that's, trying to figure this out, or maybe they're trying to do it for their first time and they're a little bit nervous and they want to understand like what are the things that I have to be considering? What are the things that I need in place? And this is super valuable. So thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom of experience. And I'm excited to keep seeing you guys grow. So
thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's interview. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this interview, we do one like it every single week inside of our free Facebook group called 7-Figure Agency Owners and High Ticket Coaches. So if you're an agency owner, coach, service provider, and you're really wanting to scale to 7 figures and beyond, join us inside the group. It's coachingsales.com/group. Again, coachingsales.com/group. See you on the inside.